Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Writers Podcast. I have with me today guest Miranda Oh. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Great, thank you. And we're here to talk about your latest book, which is
Chin Up Tits Out. Well, actually, that's the series. It's Just Breathe, Chin Up
okay.
Tits Out. So,
Okay, and is this which book in the series?
third book in the series.
Third book in the series. All right. So normally I'd like to get a little bit of background about you, but I'm curious about the title of your series. Where did that come from?
You know what? It it came from a mantra. Let's call it that. Let's call it that. Life was a tizzy. Life was
Hmm.
going a lot of different ways and a lot of negative ways. And
Okay.
when writing about that
Hmm.
and creating kind of a fictional story around all of this negativity, I kept finding not only my main character, but myself acting
Hmm.
as I need to stand up tall, shoulders back, hold your head held high, no matter what.
Hmm.
So if somebody were to tell you some really devastating news, to just chin up, tits out, or you hit a roadblock in life, chin up, tits out. So it became a life mantra unknowingly, and then turned into my series title, which then turned into kind of like my slogan and brand over the years. So
Cool.
yeah, that's in a nutshell where it came from.
All right. So with that out of the way, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves, who you are, and how you became a writer?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Miranda Oh. I am a Canadian. I'm from the prairies, Manitoba,
Hmm.
and
Alberta.
perfect. We're from the same playing field, kind of, sort of.
That's right.
And I was 25 when I published my first book
Hmm.
in the Chin Up Tits Out series, and it took me 6 years to get to my third book. So
Mm.
there was a lot that I learned in that time,
Hmm.
but I was super happy to get all three books out. You know what? I had a story.
Hmm.
It was dramatic and traumatic, and I mean, everybody going through their 20s goes through stuff, right?
Hmm. Yep.
I just decided to write it out and share it with the world,
Mm.
and I really wanted to allow people to not feel like they were the only persons going through a situation. You know,
Okay.
I was going through immigration, long distance relationship stuff. I went through racism stuff. I went through cancer stuff, mental illness stuff, a whole bunch of stuff, addiction stuff. And um, I felt alone a lot of the time. I
Mm.
felt like I was the only person going through this, and I was well supported, but I definitely did not feel great.
Hmm.
And so when I chose to write my story out,
Hmm.
I I said, okay, this is it. We're good. We're good. We're gonna do this. And then I ended up connecting with a bunch of people around the world, and that is kind of my aha moment, my light bulb moment. This was
Oh,
the
okay.
way that I wanted to go, and talk about deep dark things, but
Hmm.
in a silver light. Have a little fun
Right.
with it. I mean, life is dark and stressful enough.
Right.
So this was my opportunity to really lighten it up and make people feel a little less alone in a dark situation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So how did the urge to write this out come then? Were you have you had formal training, or how did that come about for you?
Well, I guess if you look at my resume, I did go to college for creative communications, and
Okay.
I graduated with a major in public relations and a minor in broadcast. So,
Mm.
do I have formal training? Maybe a little bit here or there,
Mhm.
but um, really, I'm a storyteller at heart.
Okay.
It was, Monday morning after a long weekend or after a weekend, my coworkers or my friends would be like, "Ooh, tell me what happened," and I
Mhm.
would just spew out a story, drama,
Mhm.
drama, drama, and I loved telling stories. I still do love telling stories. So even throughout the situation, if you picture, I was maybe 20 at the time, and
Mhm.
like in an immigration officer's face in the middle of Johannesburg, South Africa, and he big guy, like 6'6", has a machete, has a machine gun in a big officer outfit. And I was giving him a what for, because he wasn't allowing me into the Canadian embassy to speak to an immigration officer to talk to about my partner at the time, his visa application. And I was in his face like da 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 da. And then after that, I was like, man, that is a story. Like, you got to share that story. So I would verbally tell stories, but it wasn't until after all the drama was said and done that the writing it out piece came to like fruition. I needed to really get through it all before I put it on pen and paper. So it wasn't only cathartic and healing for me, but it was an opportunity to actually create a book or a handful of books and get them out there. So
okay. And were you a big reader?
Yes and no. I have my phases. I'm right now in the phase of growing my family. So what am I reading? How to deal with kids at XYZ age, or how to deal with pregnancy, or whatever the scenario is. Anytime I have off, I tend to burn through books. Now, if I'm working and writing and podcasting and this and that, I tend to try to pick up books, but then I fall asleep 5 minutes later and I'm like, I'm reading the same page 7 times in a row. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it just doesn't stick, you know? But if I do go on vacation, or if I have some time away from, let's call it just the chaos of life, then I can burn through books really quickly. Like, if you find me on a beach in the tropics, I will have a cocktail in one hand, a book in the other, my hat, and I'm sitting on a beanbag on the beach, and I'm just like, yo, senior, like, keep this filled.
And what types of books do you like to read?
You know what? I'm not picky. I've literally read everything from historical fiction to romance to biographies to horror. Like, one thing I haven't gotten into is fantasy, and I think a lot of it I've dabbled into it. But I love when I can put myself into a main character's shoes and feel it. And understand where fantasy is a whole other world. And so I haven't really gotten into that per se as like just me as a human. But if I can feel what the main character is feeling, then you got me hooked.
Okay. Any favorite authors?
Oh, my favorite author, another Canadian author, is Lawrence Hill. The Book of Negroes was my biggest book that I had accomplished and read. And I think I've read that book 3 times. I've watched all that, like the adaptations to TV or film or whatever it was. I absolutely loved his writing, and that's historical fiction. I don't know what caught me on it. It's funny because my partner now, and the father to my children, he is Nigerian. So if you talk to him about his ancestry and his lineage, there are people that did disappear in the line of slavery. And you know, there's just his grandfather's brothers or his father's cousins, you know, did just vanish from the village one day and were never to be seen or again, or years and years and years down the road, you know, somebody came back and circled back to that village. And so it was kind of cool because I read that way before ever meeting him. And then when we did meet and we started talking about, you know, my knowledge just through reading and, you know, meeting other people, it was kind of cool to kind of put all those pieces together, but in a real life situation, you know? So I really resonated. I don't know why I resonated with that book, but it just, Lawrence Hill is a phenomenal author, and that book is my favorite.
Okay. So as to your book series, what genre is your books slotted under? Mhm.
Chick lit, but I mean, chick lit
Mm,
is a massive umbrella. Like
sure.
it's massive. It could be anything. So really, what you're gonna find in there is you will find romance, you will find comedy, you will find drama,
Mhm.
um, and kind of everything in between. And like I said, I like writing about tough stuff. You know,
Right.
it's not easy to write about racism without crossing a line.
Sure.
It's not easy writing about mental illness
Mhm.
without being insensitive or again crossing a line. The same with addiction or abuse.
Mm,
That stuff is ugly stuff.
right.
But you know, going through it myself
Mhm.
was gave me kind of a front row seat. I'm like, "Hey, like I lived this. This was my experience.
Mhm.
And this is how I chose to get through it. Whether or not you agree with it or not, you don't have to. It's
Mhm.
just my experience and maybe if I write about it that one person that reads it will relate and connect and it will help them get through it and
Right.
once I publish my books and, encourage people to come back and talk to me,
Mhm.
you're learning a lot of stories. This happened to me, and I read your book, and I got the courage and did XYZ and moved
Mhm.
to the next phase of my life
Right.
because of your words. And or I feel way less crazy now that I've read your books because girl, you crazy.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that was definitely, all the different types of genres or topics that you might see within my books.
Okay. So, what's your capsule or summary or elevator pitch for this series?
Oh my goodness, good question. I remember walking into a bookstore with my first book and like having it like written out.
Mhm.
That was like before having a publicist and like before everything. And um,
Mhm.
I think what what was it? It had something to do with my elevator pitch had something to do with long distance relationships, a hot and cold tumultuous relationship, African bushes and carnival rides. And you're like, well, what?
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, it's a whole lot of everything.
Mm.
And I say I encourage a beverage while reading, whether that beverage is a cup of tea or if it's a twisted tea or somewhere in between. I said sit yourself down, grab a box of tissues, and just
Mhm.
burn through the books, and you'll see why. And that's the feedback that I've gotten. It's been an entertaining page turner. So
Mhm.
yeah.
So, is it fair to say that this series is fiction, but it's autobiographical?
Yeah, slightly. Yeah, it's fiction based on my 20s.
Right.
Um, Now my 20s were a lot less refined, somewhat a little bit more crazy,
Mhm.
and maybe my language wasn't so eloquent as my main character. So there was definitely a lot of refining and retuning to make
Right.
sure that it made sense, like
Mhm.
there's a difference between having a conversation with somebody and then reading words and being on the same page with somebody, right?
Right. Yep.
So definitely there was a lot of editing. The first book, I remember getting it back and going like, oh my God, sounds nothing like what I wrote, but it's so much better. And then by the time the third book came out, Just Breathe,
Mhm.
I had kind of gotten used to writing in a way saying, okay, if I said this,
Mhm.
how do I say the same thing, but in a way that a written word makes it make sense?
Right.
Um, and so, or it's as equally as impactful. So
Mhm.
there was a lot of learning from a writing perspective in the three
Right.
books, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I like it.
Okay, so that's a nice segue into the more mechanical side of the or process side of your books. How did you learn to write, or what was your process like? How did you first like? Is it the same now as your first book as it is with your third book? Has it evolved? Like how did that all work out for you?
It has evolved 100 times over. I remember my first book, I wrote it in 4 weekends. That was it.
Wow.
Like 4 weekends, hammered out the keyboard and wrote it as fast as I could and got it off to an editor, and she ended up having to almost like ghost write it for me, which was fine. It was a first time around, and she did wonderful. And then by the time my third book came out, I don't want to say I had like plotted everything out, but I had written out all the, let's call it the big dramatic moments,
So you had an
or
outline.
I had an outline, but it was, you know, chronological, or the people that I wanted to bring into the book. So I had written out that, and then basically just wrote how it came out. Now, because I was writing about something that has truth to it, it was a little bit easier to go back into my memory bank and pull out, how did this play out in person, and how can I translate that to a book? Now, my next series that I'm working on currently, it's moving very slowly, but that's okay. Life happens. It's not based on myself. It is made up fictional characters, but those characters are definitely drawn from real life people that I've interviewed. So trying to make sure that I capture their stories in their own voices, not my own voice, is a completely different writing process. So I've written about myself, and I've written from other people's point of view, and I've made a bunch of stuff up in between. So I'm definitely like, every single book I write, that process changes consistently. But I think that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's an artist thing, that like you're constantly evolving and changing. But for me, I am finding that every single time I come down to a keyboard, the way that my brain processes what I'm going to write is a little bit different than it was the previous time.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty common. I think I've heard that from other authors, that their processes depends on the project. It changes, or they modify their process to fit the project as well. So when you wrote the first book, did you know at that time that it was going to be a series?
I learned really quickly, yes, because when I was writing, there was a lot for me to say. And I realized that I had only gotten a chunk of reality out. And so I was like, okay, is this going to be a 1 book, a 2 book, a 3 book, a 18 book? Like, what is it going to be? And I'm a firm believer that all things happen in threes, whether it's good or bad. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this in 3. And so I cut it up at that point, going, okay, you know, the first book is very much the love story, and a lot of immigration, a lot of racism, etc. The second book has a lot to do with cancer and mental illness and abuse. And then the third book is the recovery, and kind of like, how do you dig yourself out of that? So, or the cherry on top of a perfect sundae, I'd like to say, but a colorful sundae, maybe not a perfect sundae, but yeah. So I very much will say, how can I do this to leave those readers wanting more, but also completing that piece of the story? And so that was kind of how I did it. So 3 books, and good things happen in 3, they say, and that was what happened with this one.
Cool. Is there like a time span for the 3 books, like over 10 years, or does this take the character from their 20s into their 30s, or?
Yeah, about 10 years. Yeah, 18 to late 20s. So yeah,
very cool. So you mentioned that with your first book that you wrote it in 4 weekends. How many words was that?
it was about just under 30,000. And then the second book was like substantially bigger. It was like double, if not more than double the size. It was over 60,000. And then the third book was very, very similar. It was maybe about 55,000. So just a little bit smaller than the second book. I don't know why I had a lot more to say, or a lot more details to share around, you know, the cancer journey and the abuse and the mental illness, etc., and addiction. Like, those things are really heavy topics. It was a heavy book. you know, and I had people say, like, I went through cancer with so and so in my life. I'm just gonna skip this book and go to the third one. Are you
Mm-hmm.
you good with that? I'm like, hey, you're the reader. Go ahead.
Right.
But then also people that were going through that, you know, they have a partner with cancer, or they have a sibling with addiction, or
Mm-hmm.
XYZ. It was a book for them to pick up and go, oh my God, I'm not the only one that goes through this. You know, I'm not the
Right.
only one that's sitting across from a doctor saying, you cannot do this or you will die.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, those are tough words to live. They
Mm-hmm.
were tough words to relive and write, but it was one of those books that just, like, you were hooked from the time that you opened it to the time that it was done.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So for you personally, how cathartic was this series?
oh, I appreciate and count my blessings every single day
Mm.
right now, years later,
Mm-hmm.
to going through that trauma and having the opportunity to sit in my own poo, let's call it that, for the years of writing. You
Right.
know, I like, as much as I would love to turn it around and say the bad stuff that happened was my ex-partner's fault, or immigration's fault, or XYZ's fault,
Mm-hmm.
it gave me the opportunity to say, no, 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 I miss the red flags. I ignored the red flags. I made those decisions. I took ownership of everything that happened to me. And that was, one, a hard pill to swallow,
Mm-hmm.
and two, an even harder pill to digest and figure out, how am I going to make sure that I don't make these same mistakes
Right.
again, or these same choices again, that will
Mm-hmm.
lead me inevitably down a similar path. So there was a lot of learning that was done, but in that learning, it gave me opportunity for new series and new book opportunities and
Mm-hmm.
new connections and networking, and then ultimately led me to the life that I have now. You know, a wonderful partner, a child, kids on the
Mm-hmm.
way. Like, it's all great stuff. And like I
Mm-hmm.
said, every morning I wake up and I'm like, thank God I went through that at 23
Mm-hmm.
versus, you know, 45, and starting to have to pick up my life a lot later,
Right.
or start fresh from a lot later. I had to
Right.
start fresh at 25. I didn't have to
Yeah.
start fresh a few
Yeah.
decades
I
later.
have to say you sound wise beyond your years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been told that. I've been told that. You know, going through, well, like, my ex-husband was an immigrant
Mm-hmm.
who was diagnosed with cancer shortly after moving to Canada, and then
Mm.
one day got on got on a plane and disappeared. And this
Mm.
all happened before my 25th birthday.
Wow.
Um and of course there's lots of details in between there, but, you know, like I said, I've had to have really frank discussions with lawyers. I've had to have really tough conversations with doctors and police
Mm-hmm.
officers, and, you know, a lot of official type of people
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, I wish upon nobody, but being able to represent yourself and advocate for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and learning what is most important at the end of the day has been the greatest life lesson. And I am very blessed that I got through that
Mm-hmm.
again in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, after going through all that, there's a time of, like, sowing your wild oats and figuring yourself out after you've hit rock bottom. So once you
Mm-hmm.
kind of find yourself floating the surface again,
Right.
there's a time to, like, try out and experiment and push those limits. And I still was doing that in the time that the rest of my peers were doing that. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, I was late 20s and living a single life and living on my own and living downtown and making great, you know, great money, and being fully independent. And
Mm-hmm.
so that opportunity in itself was also a step in leading me to, you know, the successes that I have today.
Right. Right. Wow. It sounds like you've crammed a lifetime of living into a very short time
I know,
frame.
it's crazy. It's crazy.
I think one of the most things that you've said that resonates the most for me is, and it kind of goes to a quote from my favorite writer, which is Stephen King, is that he says that fiction is the truth inside the lie.
Yeah.
And I think that readers really respond to writers that are writing about hard, honest subjects.
Yep.
And that sounds exactly like what you've been doing as well. So,
Yep. Yep.
um, in your process for your second and third book, how long did it take you to write those?
Oh goodness. Okay, so between book number 1 and book number 2, the launch dates were about 11 months apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I hammered that off so fast.
Mm,
So fast. And then between my second book and third book launch date, I think there was 3 years.
mm,
And people were like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you like you made us wait." And it was a cliffhanger, and it was a
right.
slap in the face
Mm,
cliffhanger. And I said, hold on a minute, I'm not in a space in my life to write this yet. I had not learned all the lessons I needed to
mm,
write in order to end the book properly.
okay.
um so yeah, there was definitely a longer time between book 2 and 3 and then there was between book 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
But when I tell people that and when I speak to it, it just goes to show, like, if you are going to write about yourself or write, the stranger stuff, the reality into
Mm-hmm.
your stories, don't don't force yourself to just put words on a piece of paper when you're not ready to.
Okay.
It's okay to take a step back and to live your life and to learn your lessons,
Mm-hmm.
and then take that back to the keyboard,
Mm-hmm.
and actually put something meaningful down. If that takes you 3 years, if that takes you 10 years, if it takes you 3 months, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the one best thing about being a self-published author in the indie
Right.
world is that you are your own timeline, you are your own boss, you get to kind of make that up as you go along. So
Right. So, so your actual writing process then, do you like, how do you write? Do you use Microsoft Word, Scrivener,
I use Word.
Word? Okay.
Yeah, I use Word, and I literally pour my blood, sweat, and tears onto my keyboard. I'm pretty sure I need to like buy a new keyboard after every book, just because I'm hammering out,
Okay.
and people are like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Shh, don't talk to me." It's one of those things, and then I will talk to myself, like I'll type something out and then
Right.
reread it, and I'm like, "Oh damn, that's good." like just have that sound or like that
Right.
soundtrack or like that internal monologue
Yeah.
cheering you on, or like
Mm-hmm.
next thing you know I'm crying. Like it's a lot. There's a whole circle of emotions that come out when I
Mm.
do write. And the people around me have learned that it's just best to leave me alone.
Sounds like your own primal scream therapy or
Oh
something.
God, it is. It is. Like, who needs a therapist when you can write it out? And um like
Yeah.
it's entertaining. Like my husband now, he's so funny. He's like, "So you're writing?" I said, "Yeah." He goes like, "Okay, what do you want to do when you're done? Do you want to go out for supper? Do you want to go for ice cream? Do you want to be left
Mm-hmm.
alone? Do you need a glass of wine?" I said, "You know what? Just if you hear some sort of negative sound effects
Mm-hmm.
coming from the basement, just come with the bottle of wine, top up my glass. Don't even say a word. Don't even look at me." And he's like, "All right, I'm not even gonna look at you." I said, "Don't, because I don't want you to question what's going on, because you're gonna just break my focus." And he's like, "All right, cool." And then when
Mm-hmm.
I'm done, I'm like, "I'm done. I'm like, I want pizza and chicken wings, and I want to eat it in bed and then just close my eyes." And he's like,
Right.
okay. So
Mm.
yeah, it's definitely, I love it. Like it comes all out of me, and I
Mm.
am just exhausted after that. But I I have a colleague of mine who is also a writer, and she writes in like 5 minute spurts.
Mm.
And I can't. It takes me 5 minutes to get my head on right. Like,
Right.
I need to write in minimum 4 hour spurts,
Oh,
maximum like 8 hours. So
wow.
um like, if I can do a full day, I can get a ton done. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to be in that right mindset, and you have to have that
Yeah.
right environment. And sometimes that just doesn't come.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're like ready and you have the whole day planned and you're like, I got no words. And then some
Yeah.
days you schedule out 4 hours and you could totally use 6 or 8 hours to keep going, but that's
Uh-huh.
just, not the way my childcare ends, or,
Sure.
it's bedtime or whatever it is. So
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, it's constantly evolving and constantly changing, but it's
Okay.
that's the fun of it.
So when you have one of these sessions, can you do that several days in a row, or is it like you do it one day and then I need like 4 days to recharge my batteries kind of thing? Or
Yeah, well, okay, so I also work in corporate Monday to Friday, like
Mhm.
regular business hours.
Okay.
So, um, it's pretty tough for me to have more than one day in a row unless I choose to do a Saturday and Sunday. But
Mhm.
I found it very difficult to do that on a Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
I could wake up and do it on a Saturday and like hammer it out on Saturday, but then Saturday night, you're like, all right,
Mhm.
I'm gonna put my party shoes on and go like release everything that I have left.
Right.
And then Sunday is like a Netflix chill and skip the dishes kind of
Right.
day.
Yeah. And
So
this is the process that you're using for your current series as well?
well, current series is a little bit more difficult because when I wrote my third book, I was single living downtown and had the
Mhm.
time to dedicate a whole day. Now I have a 15-month-old child at home. She's in daycare part-time. So I'm
Mhm.
juggling working with this child
Mhm.
at home and working
Right.
part-time with a nanny. And um, so I write in shorter stints.
Mm.
Sometimes like I'll drop her off at my parents and I'll go hide in my mom's office for a little while and write and get out what I feel like is 10,000 words, but it's only like 2,000 and you're like, oh my God. So
Mhm.
let's just say I'm trying to figure out a balance as a new parent
Mhm.
and continuing to write and even have the brain capacity to write.
Mhm.
I'm finding it difficult. I'm also pregnant with,
Mhm.
expecting in a few months. So my brain doesn't work at the end of the day. It doesn't even work at 10 a.m. in the morning
Right.
sometimes. Um, so that's why I said it is taking me a little bit longer
Sure.
than it did before. And that writing process has dramatically changed. And I'm still
Right.
trying to find that balance. But I'm not mad at myself for not writing as fast as I would like
Sure.
to.
Sure.
A lot of people that I have spoken to, a lot of other authors that have become parents during their writing careers, they're just like, I wouldn't have even attempted. Like for the
Yeah.
first 5 years, I wouldn't have even attempted. And I'm like, 5 years? Like my kid's got to be five before I can go back to writing. Like what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, I remember when I was on mat leave for
Mhm.
my first kid, and I had a full intentions on writing a book in 6 months while
Mhm.
taking care of a newborn. I think I wrote like 2,000 words. I was
Mm.
like, oh, okay, so no brain capacity. And
Mhm.
it's not that I don't want to, and it's not that I don't think about it because I do. It's always on my mind, but
Mhm.
there's a time and a place for putting it out on paperwork, and it's just not that time or place right now in my life.
Sure.
And that's okay. The story's not going anywhere.
That's
The
right.
story's still going to be there. It's still evolving in my head. Those characters still do what they're going to do. And when the books come out, the books come out.
Mhm. With your first series, because you mentioned it's dealing with so many heavy subjects, there's been a trend or a new process that's sort of come up with book publishing about sensitivity readers. Is that something that you looked into, or were you even aware of that as something a lot of writers have to do nowadays? Or?
Um, I didn't have that for my first set of books.
Okay.
I have a group of readers, like I don't remember what I called them. I maybe want to call them like a test group or something like
Beta.
that. Yeah, beta, maybe. I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe I called them something fancy.
Right.
Um, and they're all women. Like I said,
Hmm.
my next series, I interviewed a bunch of women. I interviewed 100 women from around the world, and my beta readers for my next series are a specific group of people that I did interview, but
Mm.
they are all creators of some sort. So some
Okay.
of them are writers, some of them are designers, some of them are artists like they're all creators of some sort.
Right.
Um, and so I specifically asked them because of just being in the world of creating and
Hmm.
sharing virtually, globally. Um, and due to the nature that I am writing about and the topics that I am writing about, they are sensitive,
Hmm.
and I figured, you know what, if I can get and they're and all all of them are from different countries. Like every single one of them is from a different country. So if I can get their perspectives and alignment from 6 different countries, 6 different women, 6 different age groups, then I think I'm kind of hitting that check mark of did I appropriately capture and speak about these topics without crossing lines. And of course, it's still going to go through, a professional editor before it gets published. And my editor is wonderful. She reads my mind. I've never met her in person, but she's genius.
Is this the same editor that did your first book?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did she do all 3? She didn't do all 3. Did she do 2? She did the last 2, the second 2.
Okay.
And I've already told her I want her for like the rest of time. And she's agreed to that. And it's mostly, you know what, the editor, I think the relationship between author and editor is a very special one because you need to capture an editor. And again, I'm self-published. So before I even take it to like a small publishing house or choose to do it on my own, I am getting a professional editor to do it before a second editor might pick it up and do that.
Okay.
But that first line of editor, she and I have to have a good relationship. She needs to kind of understand where my brain is trying to go with the message. Because if they don't understand that, or don't capture that idea, then they might just ruin the whole message for you for your book. So that's my personal opinion. I think you have to be jiving with your editor on much more of just a here's my book and make it sound better. You need to jive on a brainwave level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. This would be of great interest to new writers because you've just mentioned editors and beta readers. How did you go about getting those?
Luckily, with my publicist Mickey Mickelson at Creative Edge, he has introduced me. Well, the community that he represents, he keeps very close, and so I'm constantly meeting the people that he represents, and those people are authors alike, artists alike. There's publishers in there. There's editors in there. There's graphic designers in there. There's a whole slew of artists that he represents, and when you get to speaking with them, you kind of learn who they are virtually. Of course, they're from around the world, so you don't really have the opportunity to go to, few states down and meet them. But you have a conversation with one of them or a group conversation, and you hear somebody and their perspective, and it's a quick Facebook message and saying, hey, I like your vibes, like let's chat a little bit, let's be friends. So I've definitely met most of the contacts that I am using today through the group. But that doesn't, like, if you're not part of a group and if you're an aspiring writer, like there are people out there that are even in our industry that are promote themselves as editors and publishers and this and that. Reach out to them, have conversations with them, get to know them, interview them as much as they interview you, because you're an advocate for yourself, right? And for your story. And I'll tell you, the 3 books that I've written, I did not go down the same path for publishing on each of the books. Every single time was a different avenue, a different route that I took. All led me to success, but every single time I published a book, I learned something. So
cool. And on the publishing side, did you do your own covers and things of that nature? You hired people for that?
Yeah, hired people like that. Hired a person who did my first 2 book covers, and she was absolutely wonderful. From the UK. She again brainwaved me really well. And then I lost touch with her for the 3rd book, did a different publishing avenue for the 3rd book. It came out, and as wonderful as it wasn't what I wanted it to be. So I ended up actually taking the rights back for that book instead of having it with a publisher, and worked on getting a recreation of the cover. So I'm working on relaunching that 3rd book with the new cover. And it's literally on par with my first 2 books. Like,
Okay.
same imagery, same feel, same everything, which is what I wanted.
Hmm.
It just didn't happen the first time around. So, hey, you know what? That's okay. Like, you don't have to get it right on the first try. Like,
Okay.
that's the beauty of being an author now and having a lot of everything digital, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, the person that I found is now actually local, and he is a friend of my husband's.
Mm.
And I said, okay, like, you're hired for all my book covers now. And he's like, all right, girl, you tell me what's next. So
Right.
yeah,
Cool.
I think definitely finding the trial and error. It's okay if you go through 10 people,
Mhm.
on 10 different books or 10 different projects, or heck, 5 different projects. Just find that person that jives with you well, and then
Mhm.
keep them close, and work well with them.
Right. Okay. What you mentioned your new series that you're working on. What's that about?
So, like I had mentioned, I had interviewed 100 women from around the world. All of those women have a condition called endometriosis.
Okay.
Endometriosis starts in your reproductive organs and kind of replicates and populates all over your body. And it's
Mm.
very painful. It's one of the most painful conditions out there. It causes infertility. Sometimes it leads to death. There is a lot of other problems that it can create. It can create GI issues, lung issues. It's like a cancer, but it's not cancer, if that makes
Mm.
any sense.
Okay.
And I was diagnosed with it when I was 20, no, 30, 29, 30, something like that.
Mhm.
And I was absolutely petrified because, well, first of all, there's no cure, there's no treatment.
Mhm.
They tell you that pregnancy could be a treatment or a cure, but after pregnancy, it could come back. You could get a hysterectomy, so your uterus and your parts could
Mhm.
come out. But if any of the disease is left over, let's say on your pelvic wall or your bowel or your bladder, it can still replicate there and
Mm.
cause internal bleeding and cysts and a lot of ugly stuff.
Mm.
And if you don't know somebody who has it, which 1 in 10 women around the world have endometriosis. So it
Mm.
is very common, but it's not commonly discussed, and it's very hard to find proper care. And I learned that really the hard way.
Mm.
So when I was diagnosed, it was like this little light bulb that went, girl, you gotta write a book about it.
Mm.
But my journey was 18 months from the time I had my first unexplained pelvic pain to
Mhm.
the time I got a diagnosis. People have been dealing with this for their entire lives, from the first time that puberty hit them, and
Mhm.
they're in their 20s, their 30s. I've met women who are disabled, they are unable to work,
Mhm.
they have lost all of their parts, they've had to take them out because of emergency surgeries, etc.
Mhm.
And so they can't hold a job, they have no hope in becoming a biological mother if that was down their path, and they have all these food sensitivities, etc., and allergies due to this disease.
Mm.
And you're sitting there and you're like, you're 21 years old, like, how do you have hope to
Mm.
continue on, right? So what I chose to do is interview 100 women from the ages of 18 to in their 60s, from, I think it was 20 countries,
Mm.
and get their stories.
Right.
And I turned those stories into characters and stories, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So
Yep.
I have 3 books coming, and it's called Love My Lady Bits, because you're born with one set of lady bits, and
Mhm.
you got to learn to love them no matter what life throws at you.
Right.
So Love My Lady Bits is the series title. I like those catchy, awkward title names,
Right.
clearly.
Yep. Yep.
And each book depicts 3 different women in 3 different age groups, and each of the characters are a combination of a handful of the interviews that I conducted. So
Mm.
again, I'm writing from 100 different perspectives, but having to narrow it down to, one character per, 10, 11, 12 people.
Right.
So, creating that character with that timeline, which ultimately started with from 10 different women and 10 different stories, there's a lot going on, from first period stories to abuse and rape stories to success stories to people that have been through it all, that have chosen to say, you know what, nope, I'm taking back my life, and they're like an award-winning author, or the best lawyer in their district, or the like, they just, women are resilient and they are strong, and the people that go through the worst of the worst tend to be the best of the best people, I find.
Right.
And I not only learned so much about the disease and the condition for myself through these interviews, that I hope that I can put 1/10 of that into my books.
Wow.
And that, just making talking about this stuff less awkward. The more we
Right.
talk about it, the less awkward it's going to be.
Right. Right.
And so that's my goal in the next series, is to just, you don't even need to know what endometriosis is. Just, if you have a set of lady bits, or you like lady bits, this is going to give you a deep dark picture, not a deep dark, but a deep dive into what it's like to owning a set of lady bits that sometimes is a little bit more difficult than the average.
Right. So is this more like an anthology series, or are the stories interconnected?
I have hopes that the stories are going to be interconnected, but it is more of an anthology series.
Okay.
So you can pick up book 1, 2, or 3 in any order and read it and still be satisfied with each individual character story. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we covered quite a bit of ground. Is there anything that hasn't come up that you would like to mention at this time?
No, we've talked
No?
about it all, and I'm so
Oh,
grateful. Thank you so much,
you're
Lou.
most welcome. It was great to have you on. You sound your approach to writing is very personal, and I think that's probably what powers your success. So I wish you all the best with your future series, and when you get further down the line with them, I'm sure you'll come back on and we can talk about them a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to get this next book out.
Right.
Lord knows when it's going to happen, but it'll happen. It's bound to happen.
Right. Okay. Well, it was a blast talking to you, Miranda. I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Lou. You too.
Okay. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
And scene. And there we go. We's done.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you.